Hi there, and I'd like to welcome you to this 27th International APQO conference here that's being held as a sponsorship of the Sri Lanka Quality Association. The theme for this conference is Renewed Quality and Transformation for a World with a Fresh Start. And we've had lots of fresh starts happening with the coronavirus, with also the challenges of technology. And these are impetus that create a new way of thinking we have to come to deal with quality in this changing age. So what is our responsibility as quality professionals? What I'd like to do today is to walk us through 5 sections of this speech and deal with how to take a fresh look at the things we've all known for some time, and yet we haven't put them together necessarily as a system. So we're going to begin with talking about organizational construct and what I call the 3 Gemba construct. How do we actually organize work? Then we'll turn to the process of learning and 2 particular models for dealing with this. One is called triple loop learning, and it talks about how we conduct investigations into what's going on in organizations, and cycles of improvement, which talk about how we affect continual improvement of the work that we're doing. In the 3rd section, we'll turn to standard work, which is the foundation of quality management. As Dr. Duran has said, without a standard, there can be no improvement. This begins and establishes the baseline for which we're going to be making improvements in an organization. In section 4, we'll talk about building an interconnected network of work processes. Dr. Deming talked about having an appreciation for systems, but we need more than just appreciation. We need to develop systems thinking, a whole way of systems perceiving for how business will change in the future, particularly as we start thinking about the effects of technology shifts on what we're doing at work. And finally, the 5th element is about strategic quality management, which is called Hoshin Kanri in the Japanese context. And with this, we're going to talk about how do we bring together all of the different elements of change for the directed purpose of improvement of the organization's total performance over time. So let's turn to the first of these topics, which is the levels of organizational structure, or the 3 Gemba construct. And so I want to begin by sharing with you a model that I created back in 1994 in a book, Business Systems Engineering. And this is the structure of a generic business system architecture. And what you see in here is that all organizations basically have 3 levels of operation. There's an enterprise level, which is the overall performance of the organization. Many people think of that as the C-suite or the executive suite, where decision-making is done. We have the business application, where we formulate business principles, practices, and products, and then bring them to markets. And that's where we are directly facing the customers. And then we have the operations area. And at this level, what we're doing is we are conducting the daily business of designing, delivering, and supporting the work product that we deliver to our customers. And this can include the manufacturing as well as service operations of an organization. Now, what we see in this is that each of those reflects its own Gemba. And what we want to understand is, what is the meaning of Gemba? This is a Japanese kanji term, and Japanese kanji terms originally come from Chinese characters in the 1600s that were borrowed to create a written language for Japan. And we see that the very core of the original words here, or the original kanji for Gemba, actually define a number of answers to questions which we can use following the classic 5W 1H questions of problem solving as we're trying to define what is a problem. So the questions are: what happened? Who was there? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? And how did it happen? And the answer to this is embedded in the meaning of these characters. So first of all, we see that what happened was a survey, a detailed scrutiny happened. Who did it? It was the king. It's an executive function. It's not just the work of workers to take a look at their own work, but it's the executive function to understand. When did it happen? It happened at sunset, at the end of a working period. And where did it happen? At the point where real work is being done. It went to that place where the worker is actually doing the work and producing value or creating waste. Why did it happen? The king needed to understand the real thing. What is the situation that is occurring in the kingdom? How is it working? What can be done to improve it? And how did it happen? It was personal activity by the king to go notice what was different, observe it, and perceive how to make things better. So we see embedded in the concept of Gemba is an executive opportunity to seek improvements. And it's the responsibility of the executive function to effect improvements in all aspects of the business. Now, as we start applying this, we see that change management occurs across all three of these levels of the Gemba. So the foundation for change is control. That means that standards are required. Then we see change as an incremental improvement process where some sort of process measurement is necessary to be able to assure that we are actually making things better and not things worse. And then change as breakthrough occurs when we are using technology as a critical enabler. And this is now the challenge many of us are facing as we start seeing the lure or attraction of new technologies such as artificial intelligence or machine learning or blockchain. And we want to understand how can we use those to our advantage in assuring better products and services are delivered to customers. And then we see change as transformation. And this is where we create a participative culture where everybody is pulling together to make sure that this change is integrated across the organization, and where we share common goals that stimulate success for the mutual benefit of all participants in that organization. And so we see Gemba 1 is the place of standards. Gemba 2 is where we move into this technology enabler through benchmarking and understanding what applications are being developed that apply to us. And Gemba 3 is this transformation concept where we're saying, how do we deal with new culture? How do we deal with total shifts in our product line or services? So changes are made to stabilize and improve standard work. That's where value is created in the organization. It's also where value can be destroyed. And so we have to understand, how do we create value? That's called Kaizen, improvement for the better. And how do we avoid APQO, which is improvement for the worse? So that means we can have both kinds of improvement. And the choice that we make is we have to design the type of improvement we'd like to have for our future. Now, if we transform this into current quality thinking, we see basically that there are these three levels of the organization. At the operational level, we have what we would call compliance. For many organizations, this is a series of standards or industry requirements that are met or customer requirements for specific contracts. And this is, if you will, a value-based situation. So this is what we often call operational excellence, getting the product right as it's being delivered to customers. And then we have an aspiration level at the top of this hierarchy. And this is where we worry about what we call business excellence. And so the aspiration level is, where do we want to go? What do we want to become in the future? What is our idea of excellence we would like to ascribe to? And we move from the operational excellence to the business excellence using a planning process, where we create a portfolio of improvement projects, which we benchmark externally, conduct self-assessments, and gradually build capability and competence into our organization. As we do this change system, we are creating a quality systems approach to how we manage for the future. Now, if we take a look at these three organizations, we see there's actually three different working environments. So the operational emphasis, the situational emphasis, and then the future emphasis. And what happens is, in each of these, we are deploying different types of approaches. So at the operational emphasis, it's about tactical scenario engagement. What do we do if these conditions do not prevail? If supplies don't come on time? If there is some allocation of critical parts we need for our products? Or if there is a failure mechanism that gets activated in our production process or our supply chain? And here what we're doing is resource management. We are understanding how do we keep track of the things we're doing and use them to our best advantage. This is also the first step or the foundation for what we need to do. If we don't manage the resources, we'll squander them. The next level, Gemba 2, is about understanding resource availability. What do we need at a high priority level to make the changes become real and to affect change on a reasonable schedule? This is a situational emphasis. And in military warfare, it's no longer called tactics, it's called operational art. So a general can't order new tanks. You know, they can have replacement tanks, but they can't order new technology. They can't order new technologies of missiles and so forth. So what they have to do is what's called operational art, learning how to best deploy what they've got so that they are in a favored position compared to their opponents. Now, this is basically about the dynamic capabilities an organization has in its competitive domain. Now that's the second level of the Gemba, and here we can bring in new technologies that exist and have proven themselves, but it's not really the time to do a lot of experimentation about new things. So we have to have some guarantee that there is at least a reasonable expectation for a good return for projects that we're doing at this level. When we go to the future emphasis, we're talking about what's called in military terms grand strategy. So grand strategy is how do we actually create the resources necessary to have a strong position in the future? And so the future emphasis is got to answer questions like, how much can we actually invest in these types of capabilities? What's going to be the way we gather people to work together? How do we fuse them into an instrument of collaboration so that they can not only do analytics together and work together, but also move as one? If you ever watch ants moving, you'll see that they actually have some intuitive understanding of how each one of them takes a little crumb and moves that food to their hive where they can actually have the storage that they need to survive through a winter. And each one is there working independently, but in a very collaborative way. And so when we ask this question, what is the Gemba? We can answer it and say it's a unique workplace that's characterized by a coherent way of working. It's got a focus area, task concentration. Each Gemba is uniquely defined by the actions that are taken and its dedication to a particular organizational outcome, whether it's standard work, upgrading the systems, or creating and finding and funding the future that the organization needs to remain in a competitive position. And we see each of those is a different Gemba. Gemba 1, Gemba 2, and then Gemba 3. Now, what this means is we have to learn to take personal responsibility for improvement, no matter which Gemba we're working at, because the responsibility will change with the Gemba levels. The workers who are at a Gemba 1 level, for instance, don't have the right to budget for new tanks in an organization, so to speak. The workers at Gemba 2 level don't have the right to change the standards of Gemba 1 unless they collaborate with them to create a new process. And so we see change is going to happen, and it means doing things in a different way from what we did before. Improvement means we're doing it better than we did before. And so how do you judge if different is actually better? So is improving coming from within the organization itself, sensitive to its own perceptions only, or is it originating from outside of ourselves? And it's in the customer environment so we can better serve those people who are actually funding the organization that we have and who are the consumers of the products and services that we're delivering. So we need to think a little bit about how do these Gembas work? So we have Gemba 1 as a worker, Gemba 2 as management in the organization, and Gemba 3 as an executive function. Each of them is there to encourage delivery of goodness, kaizen, and prevent the occurrence of badness, or kyaku. And so in Gemba 1, we see that the workers are pursuing discipline. They are trying to maintain the same approach to work so that they can create standard work and follow it. Their quality emphasis is on perfection, getting it right each time. And what they're trying to do is eliminate muda. Muda is the waste that comes from poor work discipline. And so they're working in what's called the daily management system, or Nichijo Kanri, and they're using the quality control system as a way of checking that function and auditing it. And that's what's called Henshitsu Kanri. So their methods are self-inspection of the work that they do. They use what's called 3S, and they also use quality circles as a way of coming together. At the second level of the Gemba, we see that the management teams work cross-functionally to achieve harmony. They worry about a quality emphasis on flow. A healthy organization has good flow. Its cash flows, its materials flow, and so forth. And what they're trying to do is eliminate waste from mura. Mura is waste that comes from poor flow. And here what they use is Kaizen Kanri. And these are dedicated improvement projects, as well as Henshitsu Kanri, quality control, to check that those improvement projects actually achieve what is desired as changes to the Gemba. And so here we see things that are a little familiar to many of us, things like the Gemba walk, where management goes to familiarize themselves with what's going on in the workplace. And they go with a purpose. The purpose is to give the workers what they need to eliminate any barricades to improvement. Do they need resources? Do they need decision rights? Do they just need encouragement? And they use the process of management. And so the process of management talks about how do we build a collaborative work environment among the workers. We should have shared objectives. We should have a common bond. We should pursue a shared plan that's integrated with our own resources, and then we should work together to achieve that plan. And they do this in project teams. As Joran said, all change happens one project at a time and in no other way. So here we focus the efforts of these collaborative teams on exactly this, making a dedicated improvement to the daily management system. Now at Gemba 3, the executive function, they focus on agility. Agility is the ability to be able to change and shift as external situations change. So the executive has to look out there and see what technologies will happen, what will be new materials that could affect us, what moves in the marketplace by competitors will have an effect. And so what they use as their primary quality emphasis is what's called policy. Decisions about where to go, what to do, how to dedicate resources of the organization to attend the purposeful end of that organization. And here, the type of waste that's most dominant is what's called muri, bad decision making. And many times we can take a look at organizations, and the reason that they fail and waste money is bad executive decisions. They make acquisitions they shouldn't have made. They spend money in ways that shouldn't have been spent. And they do things that end up wasting the resources of the organization. And their primary improvement projects become Hoshin Kanri projects, changes to the organization as a whole. Now the methods that they will use are the presidential review, where the executive actually gets involved in understanding what's wrong across the organization. They will use what's called the S7 strategic tools to help formulate the process of Hoshin Kanri, or strategic planning. And they will use cross-functional teams to build organizational structure. Now notice that at each of these, there is a different type of team. They're called Jisuiken teams. And Jisuiken teams are teams that are built up of the people at that level dedicated to making improvement happen. So the business system resources are used to control things like quality, safety, cost, flow, as well as the motivation of the workers throughout the organization. Now, if we look at each of these levels, we see there are different customers, They have different work objectives. They have different dominant functions that they perform, different performance focus, different performance approach, and a quality mindset that focuses on something different. There's a team approach that's used, and also a change approach. And so as we're looking at this, the nature and structure of each Gemba level changes as we move up in the organization. Thus, workers at each level contribute in unique ways to achieve the overall performance objectives of that organization. So let's turn now to the second aspect. We're going to talk about the process of learning, which is triple loop learning applied through cycles of inquiry or cycles of improvement inquiry. And so we see that triple loop learning is actually got the first loop begins with observing the results of our work activities. So we have a process action, it produces results. We examine those results, and in single loop learning, we're asking the question, are we doing things right? Did we make the product to standards? Did it actually satisfy the customer needs? Was it on cost, on time? As we do those things, we start finding out what do we have to do to improve the task content. And that task content leads us to a process learning. How do we make our process better? And that's what the Gemba 1 decisions are about. And then as we move from there, we go to loop 2. And loop 2 is talking about business learning. And here we're asking a different question. Are we doing the right things? So do we use the right methods? Do we use the right tools? Do we use them in the right way? Have everybody been informed of what their responsibilities are, and do they actually follow the right activities that they need to have success across the organization? So rather than the task content, we're looking here at the process content. And here we're not questioning the actions in the process, but the assumptions made. And the assumptions will deal with things like how we apply statistical analysis, what methods do we use, what is the best way to interpret the way a process should perform in an idealized state. And so we make assumptions about many of those things, but we have to challenge our assumptions. When we come to the third loop, we see here we're talking about the context of the organization. And here we're talking about cultural learning. And here we're asking a question, and this is a deep one for the management team to ask, how do we decide what is right? What's right for us? What's right for our customers? Which customers should we actually target that will actually help us to fulfill the purpose or aim of our organization? And here we're concentrating on the principles, guidelines that address the business context and the operating philosophies of our organization so that we can actually make the improvements that are necessary to drive the results in that loop 1 of the learning process. Now, if we put all of this together, we see that this methodology is actually well embedded in the development of organizational psychology over the last 50, or actually almost 80 years. And it goes back to the work of Chris Argus and Donald Schoen at Harvard University. And so I present this because those three questions, are we doing things right? Are we doing the right things? And how do we decide what is right? Were also proposed by Peter Drucker in his practice of management. And so we see these are the fundamental things as management we have to talk about. What do we need to learn to affect improvement on a continual basis? Now, we also see cycles of learning are necessary. This term was introduced using the Baldrige criteria, and it was not unique to Baldrige because we see cycles of learning having been used previously in Japan. As they said, we're going to turn the SDCA or the PDCA wheel and keep learning, and then we'll ratchet up to the next level. Well, we have exactly that concept here. So the first time we do this improvement cycle, this standardized, do, check, act, we're just understanding the process. We're not ready to document it. We have to go discover what is the process? How do people work together? What are the things they need to do? The second time we make a cycle of improvement, now we're ready to document the process. And we can say, okay, now we understand the process, what the sequences are. Let's go document exactly what we do. Now, we shouldn't simplify the process as we document it. All of our historical data is based on how we've done things in the past. we have to learn what we did before we can learn how to improve what we did. And so we go back and document the process. The third cycle, we walk through the process and again, and now we understand how could we simplify it? Where is there waste? Where is there excess cost? Where is there excess time in the process? And what can we do to eliminate those things? And this is engineering the design of the business system. Before that point in time, we're not ready to automate. We don't know what the problems are that require automation. So if we talk about moving forward in capability or transforming competence to sustain competitive performance, we shouldn't just be grabbing a new technology. We have to understand what is the problem we're trying to solve by implementation of that new technology. And so we see the first time we go, we're just observing. The second time that we rotate this cycle of improvement, we're standardizing the process. And the third time is when we can begin this improvement journey. Now, standard work is the foundation of quality management systems. And many of us have not actually had the quote, pleasure of designing a startup quality system. So we come in, the system is formed, and we have to work on repairing, if you will, or correcting what's been going on in that system. So I want to present now how standard work is a foundation of quality management systems. So we have to understand, first of all, what is the logic of human motivation? And I tend to go back to Yoshio Kondo, a colleague from Japan, who wrote about this in the 1980s in Japan. And his book was translated in 1991 into English called Human Motivation, a Key Factor for Management. And he talked about this methodology, the need for understanding of humanity. How do people work? Guidance and encouragement from supervisors. How do we encourage people to work? Having a standardized job design so that people know what they're responsible for, and then working to gain self-control. That's our ability to control the quality of the work that we do. And as we improve in that ability, we start gaining confidence. And with that confidence, we lose any reluctance we have to participate with other people in teams for improvement. And as we move into those teams for improvement, we start getting a keen interest in the work that other people are doing because we see I'm dependent on the quality that's coming from them and they're dependent on the quality of work coming from me. And this is how we build teamwork in the process. So Kondo defined motivation as stimulating people's desire to work. So people want to work. They get joy out of that work. And when we talk about responsibility, we mean the strong feeling we must somehow achieve the objectives of the job which we've been given. And when we're provided with aims that are clearly explained, then people's sense of responsibility will increase in proportion to the freedom that they're allowed in the means and methods by which they can achieve those aims. In other words, are we actually giving them the proper motivation to actually make those shifts and have those decisions? Those in positions of authority should consider, in connection with human motivation, teamwork, employee participation, and the leadership which focuses or which fosters this. And this was a message that came out of Dr. Ishikawa earlier. Yoshio Kondo moved it forward. Before Ishikawa was also Nishimori. And so all of these Japanese thinkers observed the need to have people actually moving forward and taking responsibility for the quality of their own work. And so self-control, or building self-control, is a critical leverage point in this whole process. And leadership, local leadership at the level of the work process, is the driver of the motivation for the workforce. So, Duran said, without a standard, there can be no improvement. Well, why? Well, if we don't have a basis from which to understand and measure, we don't know, did we really make improvement? So workers perform, simplify, and improve work standards. And they need to arrange their daily work activities into standard ways of working. They perform those activities, they evaluate work against those standards for compliance, they adjust their work if there is a shortfall in results, or they see opportunities for improvement in the standard way of working. And then they continue this work management process routinely as they're going forward. So work standards guide workers to do routine work. And this follows what is called in Japan the SDCA cycle, or the Standardized Do Check Act. And we're going to talk about this for a little because this is the core process or key process in Gemba 1 activities. So if we take a look at this, in some organizations we see that there's 5 steps towards building those standards. So first, as Taiichi Ohno said, you've got to assume that things are a mess. So first thing in standardize, we have to make a rule. If we don't have a standard, we don't know how to move forward. So we have to make a rule. So it doesn't have to be a really good rule according to Taiichi Ohno, just a rule. And then we can evaluate our performance against that and then use it as a foundation for ratcheting upwards and getting better control over our system. So the supervisor is responsible for guiding workers in the definition of simple, easy to apply job instructions in their language so they understand them. And then find the integrating methods that create standard work processes. The workers are responsible to collaborate with their colleagues to define their job instructions in simple language. So this whole step is making the rule is facilitated by the supervisor of the work. The second is to teach the rule. And here the supervisor's responsibility to train the workers as in the agreed upon rules of production, ensure the workers are capable to follow the rules in real production processes. And the workers then are responsible to participate in the training, pay attention, follow it, and then concentrate on how to apply those rules at their work. So this is conducted by the supervisor. And what we're going to see is there is this combination of worker and supervisor responsibility that strengthens Gemba 1. We come to keep rule. And here the supervisor is responsible for monitoring workers to assure compliance with the rules and provide refresher sessions as issues or concerns appear. Somebody seems to be following things in a weak way or not very consistently. How do we get them encouraged to get back on track? The workers is responsible by starting with what's called point and say. So point and say means I have a work standard and I point at it, say what it says. I then go to my task that it's telling me to do something. I point at that task and say, and then I do the work. And that repetitive process builds those standards into my mental construct. And soon it becomes second nature. And this is typically performed by the workers with the monitoring by the supervisors. Check rule is what happens next. And here the supervisor is responsibility for auditing the work process to ensure the rules are applied in the right manner and that the rules remain valid, that something didn't change in the material flow, supply flow, information flow that creates a need to shift the rules. And the worker is responsible for checking the quality of their own work. This is called Jisu Kanri, or self-regulation of your own work. And this is the approach that's being used to what's called zero QC management and implementation in the work process, which was a methodology that Shigeo Shingo created in his lean systems. So this is performed by the workers and the supervisor. And then finally, we come to change rule. And the idea of change rule is that the supervisor uses a team-based approach, gathering the workers together to evaluate rules and methods that do not appear to be working properly or consistently. The workers have a responsibility to work with their colleagues under the supervisor as a facilitator to improve the production rules for standard work, and then the cycle continues with make rule. So this is facilitated by the supervisor. Now, as we take a look at this, we start seeing that education and motivation is actually what's happening in this first step, make rule, teach rule. Then we have what's happening in the keep rule and the check rule. These are the do check steps in the standardized work process. And so we see the first one is Shirisitan. Make sure you're ready to start your day. You have everything you need. It's all laid out. CISO is at the end of each workday. And this is where we take a look and say, how do we clean up the work? What do we need to do to get ready for tomorrow's work? And those follow every day in the process. So 3S is the daily discipline of work. Do check is what happens as long as the check step keeps telling us the work is being performed according to standards. And so that is the evaluating cycle. Now, as we take a look, if things go out of control, then we have to go to this idea of change the rule. And we have to understand what happens. And here we have what's called Siketsu. So Siketsu is about the cleaning up of the process. It's about making it so we squeeze out all of the germs or things that are infecting that process and make sure that it improves. Now, Siketsu is from the Japanese Production Management Association's terminology. It's part of the 5S, but its equivalent is Kaizen. It's about doing continual improvement. And so the signing rules creates this standard work. And then going through this process allows us to have this. And finally, this education and motivation is Shitsuke. It's the job of getting people challenged to do the work, educating them so they actually follow through. And again, that's the primary job of the supervisor in the work process. So we see the 3 S's, that's the daily workflow. And standard work operates in this do-check cycle. And so routine operations will be do check, keep rule, check rule, and so forth. And that's where we should spend at least 80% of our production time in a value-producing organization. When things go out of control, we get to the change rule. And so process QA is really about checking rule, making sure that we assure the product quality, the process quality, and that the satisfaction is delivered for the outcomes or the deliverables of that process. So assigning rules in this system creates that standard work, and managing that process deals with that. Now that's what we have in Gemba 1, the work environment. Now how do we build an interconnected network of work processes? Well, we see that this check step is going to be critical. So what happens in the check step? Well, it's a pivot point between standardization and the process of change management. So at check, we see that we're evaluating performance against targets, historical records, and also against standards. And reflection occurs regarding learning how the process really works. How does it work compared to how it used to work, how it's supposed to work, and how we'd like it to work in the future? Problem solving evaluates causality of the issues based on the measurements we take. Experiments are made to define the performance boundaries and evaluate the ability to meet expectations implicit in operational performance hypotheses or targets, and decisions are made to start improvement projects in applying new resources. So what happens in this check step? Well, we're going into the current state of what's happening. This is the situation. Mary Parker Follett called this the law of the situation. So what is the current state? If we don't understand the current state, we cannot make change happen. So we have to conduct an inquiry into the dynamic state. To do that, we have to take a look at the historical data. That's why we use Shewhart control charts of the history. And we start understanding variance hindsight. So what has happened in the past, and how do we link that to process activities? To understand what's happening today, we have to get psychological insight. What is the situation? How do we make sense out of it? What is happening with the people involved in the process? Where did it go wrong in terms of human decisions or process activities or changes in the system? And then from that, we want to have a predictive foresight. What is the probability we can create a future scenario that is actually delivering for us the value we'd like the organization to have in the future? And I call this process that we have, this current inquiry of the situation or the law of the situation, the Bayesian moment, because it is actually a conditional probability. The probability we get the future state given what we know about the current state. Now, as we take a look at this, assessments occur in that Bayesian moment. So this is where we go and we take a look at everything that's happening. So all of our improvement activities are actually happening at that step. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but we can take a look at the history. We can start building up patterns. We can start making causal inferences about what's going on. And that's how we move forward. And that's one of the reasons that we have coupled statistics so tightly to this idea of continual improvement in the work process. And when we take a look at this, we see that there are different quality concerns happening. So we have the process doer, who's a worker, and they're looking at their value-adding tasks. The process facilitator is coordinating the flows. The process owner is assuring control of the process. And the system owner is developing the system. Each one has a different work focus and is trying to do things differently. And so we see every worker in this whole production system has a unique job that contributes to system level quality. So decisions in strategy, assessment, search, and formulation occur, and I call this managerial engineering. And here we're deriving choices for strategic projects. So core quality analysis in Gemba 3 occurs by choosing the change projects we're going to have. We begin with an assessment of internal performance. And so we take a look at our processes. How well are they operating? We take a look at the business results. How well do the results perform? And we start taking a look at internal operational benchmarks. Where do we do better and why than some other places? Then we take a look outside of ourselves, strategic benchmarking. What are other organizations doing to deal with similar types of problems? How have they applied new technologies to address these things? And which of those technologies might be appropriate for us to consider given the context and history of our organization? And then finally, we move into the decision-making process. And this is going to be flavored very strongly by the critical business assumptions we have and the constraints on our business. How much do we have an available resource? What is our market position? How big a shift do we need to make? So from this, we'll apply strategic decision criteria that are basically going to be part of our strategic planning process. And this will then start to develop a portfolio of strategic change projects. And this is that same portfolio I mentioned in the quality management system. Step by step, we'll walk the 1,000-mile road to make that improvement happen. But we have to learn, first of all, what are the projects? And second of all, what's the best way to sequence those projects to maximize our results in performance? So operations to conduct a check in Gemba 1 and 2 are internal assessments, where we begin with self-checking the work that we're doing, and we move on to check the products and so forth, and internal benchmarking, and then external assessments, where we have technology benchmarking to see what is the maturity level of technologies that apply in our business, what are new market positions and competitive products for us, and perceptual benchmarking to understand what are those things that the feelings of employees or the feelings of customers about their relationship to the way our business is operating. And so each of these gives us good insight into the check step in this rotation between Gemba 1 to Gemba 2. Now, what we see is that this is one of the very first models that occurred actually back in 1988 about the daily management system, where we had SDCA, and we see at the check step, it rotates into the PDCA model. So in the check step, if things are not right, it goes to the plan step for a project. And so this is a total quality creation cycle, PDCA. So we create the process, we then go do a project, and that's the do check, we check it, and then we adjust that process. And finally, when we get back to the check step, if the check is standard, and we're now performing the way we expect and want to, then we switch back into the SDCA process. So this was the first way that this was actually discussed in some businesses in California. Now, shigeto is a Japanese word meaning true work. And it's work that adds value. And so what we see is that in the Japanese standard for daily management, they draw the cycle this way. There's the SDCA cycle feeding into the PDCA cycle at the check step. And we'll then use this model as we continue talking about this. So what do we need to gain control over? How can we learn what we need to do? What do we need less of or more of? What do we need to respond to others in our industry? How do we need to change ourselves? What do we need to improve? And what should we do first? Each of these questions helps to guide us towards making a choice about how to move forward. And now what we see is that these resource investments come into step 2. And the shift from the SDCA cycle to the PDCA cycle can be seen as one more cycle of improvement. And here now we're trying to optimize. So optimization is applying things like robotics or artificial intelligence, machine learning, to deal with things in a different way. But we don't make the mistake of jumping into that right away. We have to understand the process. We have to understand the history. As George Santayana once said, if we don't understand history, we will be doomed to repeat its mistakes. And in the 1980s, the U.S. automotive industry invested $50 billion in automation with the objective of improving productivity. And they actually did not improve their productivity one bit. So we have to be careful about the choices we make, or we will be making those Gemba 1 Mori decisions and wasting the resources of our company. And so what we see is, yes, we go through observe, standardize, improve, and then we move up into transform. So as we're moving into this transform step, we have to think about what are those new technologies? What will we do differently? How will we manage these things in different ways? And so as we go through this series CETON CISU process on a daily basis, we keep rule, check rule. What happens when we get to this check process? Is it okay? If check step says okay, then we complete the do check cycle. However, if it's not okay, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we doing things right? Yes. If we're doing the things right, then we have to shift to a PDCA cycle and find out how can we do them better than what we are doing. Do we have the resources and authority to change? If we don't have the resources and authority to change, people in Gemba 1 can't make the shift. They have to have additional resources, money or training or competence, and they have to have additional guidance given to them, so they need to escalate to a higher level. And that's when we shift, this pivot point, if you will, from SDCA to PDCA. And this is the part of what we will see in Hoshin Kanri is the strategy monitor process. Now, what's really happening is management is looking to make investments in the business. Where do we improve? And so they use this SDCA cycle and its evolutionary change through Kaizen activities, and the PDCA cycle through its breakthrough changes, and together they formulate a consistent quality delivery. That is the business planning process. Business plans have to be designed and developed at two levels. One is the operational activities that are required to assure we get routine work completed on time and on budget, and things are consistently done. And then the strategic change are those transitions that we need to make into the new environments of the future that give us success. And strategic management by policy is what the Japanese call a structured scientific approach to coordinate organizational resources and deliver its long-term business plan. So, the final section we'll talk about is strategic quality management, or Hoshin Kanri. So what is strategic quality and how is it achieved? Well, strategy is a designed action pathway to advance from an undesirable state or situation in the current tense to a future situation that's more desirable. And desirable to who? Desirable to our customers. Now, those customers may be market customers who are commercial customers of ours, or it may be the shareholders who are also financial customers of ours. And so quality is a relentless pursuit of goodness, Kaizen, coupled tightly with the persistent avoidance of badness, Kayaku, to benefit customers. And so when we're talking about strategic quality plans, we're talking about this portfolio of action plans that will move an organization from its current state to its future desired state through the changes it makes in governance, business, and operations. And then we see strategic quality deployment is linking and aligning improvement plans. So we don't actually water down the resources of the organization, but we reinforce the change by having this interlocking approach to change management across all three levels of the organization. And then strategic quality control is control at quality within limits at each of these three levels to assure the consistent delivery of customer expectations. So this is what we want to achieve. This is actually defined by the Japanese terms Hoshin Kanri. Now some claim that Hoshin means compass, but that's actually a naive way. There's really sort of two words or two core characters in the kanji. So the first is dealing with standard work. And so we're talking about, in modern times, we're talking about the term kata. So kata is a sequential way of exercises to do things. That's standard work. And then the second is measurement system. So this is only referring to a single part of the compass. It's the thin pointed needle that points towards magnetic north. And it's the operational part that allows you to find your way even in the darkest night. It's painted with a little phosphorescent glow plane. So even in dull light, you can see where you're going. And it's the compass part that delivers the value. So delivering value through standard work, that's Hoshin. Then Kanri, we see that it too has two characters. And the first is this kan, and it's the management process to control administration of change. So in organizations of large governments and so forth, there are sets of rules and methods used to administer change. And then ri is a thinking process. And it requires study to make proper change. Ri actually has its core meaning polishing jade. And polishing jade is very different than polishing crystal with fixed facets. Jade doesn't have fixed facets. It's got patterns of the chemistry that flow through it, and you have to unveil what is the best way to look at the artistic form of this stone in 3 dimensions, not just the 2 dimensions of the facet architecture. So we have to study it and make sure we understand what's going on. And that's what we mean by the management system. Now, we can have 2 different types of quality. We can have outside-in quality, and that's different from inside-out quality. So what do we mean by this? Well, outside-in quality is when we start saying that we get money from customers and we give them their results. So that means the customer is the judge. The customer makes the choices. Inside-out quality says we are producing something to our specifications for the markets, and therefore we define what the customer will get. And so it just changes based on the perspective of the customer we're serving. So we start seeing that these ideas, Kaizen and Kayaku, both apply within and outside the box. But what's happening is we are shifting the meaning of the customer that we're responsive to. And based on that shift, we will then change the definition of the type and level of quality characteristic that we're trying to perform. Now, Dr. Noriaki Kano created his theory of attractive quality in 1982. It was first published. And in there, he talked about basically 3 different types. And I've labeled them slightly differently. He called the top curve here attractive quality, and I'm calling it differentiated. He called the middle one one-dimensional quality, because you're making a head-to-head comparison between one product and another, and I'm calling that competitive quality. And then commodity quality is what he called must-be quality. It's the essence of what something delivers. And there's a Japanese words, two Japanese words or phrases that actually apply to Hinshitsu. So Hinshitsu is getting an arrow on target. It's basically hitting the target you're aiming for. And Miryo Kuteki, Hinshitsu, is talking about unspoken quality characteristics or the charm of quality. It's getting it so people say, that is attractive and it's worthy of my love. It's fit for love at first sight. And so people want it. They want to hold it. They want to kiss it. They may even want to eat it, like an iPhone. And so we see many people will actually go to those extremes about this because it has evoked, if you will, or motivated them and stimulated them to have an attraction for that. Now, Atarime Hinshitsu is talking about must-be quality. These are the things that the product must do just to be the product. The car that must start, the car that must steer, the car that must stop. If the car doesn't do that, it's not attractive. It's just no longer a car. And so we can see there's very, very different ways. Now, Kano made the observation that these attractive quality and must-be quality are two what he called unspoken quality characteristics. Attractive quality is unspoken because the customers don't know what we can design for the future or how we can do things. They'll know it when they see it. In other words, it's relativistic about how good the quality is. Must-be quality is something they can see, but they assume that it's there because they're buying this. A pencil will be able to write. It will transform the graphite from the pencil to the paper. If it doesn't do that, it's not a pencil. And so as we start taking a look, those you don't have to tell people about because they're so obvious. Obvious to the insider in the organization for the attractive quality, or the engineer that's designing it, and obvious to the person who's buying it for the must-be quality. Spoken quality characteristics, though, are what we see when we are designing something to be in a competitive market. We take a look and we ask customers, what do you want? We compare that to what the competition is delivering, and we say, we want to be superior. And so as we look at these, we want to be up and to the right on each of those curves. That's the favorite place to be. And when we start focusing on this, we start seeing each Gemba has a different way of looking at things. So this must-be quality is critical to quality. We have to get it right, no choice. This beating the competition out for a product is critical to satisfaction. We have to satisfy the customer better for each of those things that are critical to design for them. And then critical to motivation is we have to find out what moves people to want something so that they feel the need or compelled to actually engage in purchasing it. Now, as we look at this, we see that there is a graphic from the Japanese Guideline for Policy Management. And we start seeing that there are some things that we can achieve by, if you will, current activities, improvements. But there's a lot of this that we cannot achieve unless we make a change. And so what we start seeing is what we can do is in this block. We can move forward and achieve this by our current activities. And we can make that achievement happen. But is that sufficient change for the future? Or what we need to do is we have to advance ourselves and move beyond what is current. It's those projects that will advance the organization into the future and give it the strength it needs. And so the gap to be closed is the performance gap at the top. It's the gap we don't see unless we know how to look for and quantify the waste or those hidden opportunities in our organization. And so as we look through this, we see each of the three different Gembas is satisfying this need for the Hoshin-Kanri system by illuminating improvement opportunities in different stages. So each of those levels has a different state of structural change. So leaders improve the overall system, managers improve the processes, and workers improve the tasks. So everyone has an opportunity for making improvement happen. And when we take a look at this, we start seeing that different teams, the Jusuikan teams, are engaged in different ways. And we talk about this in terms of how management reviews happen. And so in 1991, I wrote the introduction to the first Japanese book that was translated into English to define what is a Hoshin-Kanri system. And this was basically the graphic I had there. And since that time, things have changed a little bit. Hewlett-Packard had a 10-step benchmarking process, a 10-step Hoshin process that started off with the visioning process with the senior management team, benchmarking to build the strategic concepts, and then acting tactically to define the improvement processes and how they would be cascaded throughout the organization. But if we take a look in this Gemba functions, we see that fundamentally what's happening in the production function of the organization, that's where we have what we call operations excellence. So we have strategic projects going into daily management and management reviewing those in a strategy monitor. At the executive function, we have annual strategy assessment. We search for what changes should be made, and then we formulate those projects that need to be changed. And that's the Hoshin-Kanri process. And so we see this strategic management by policy that I referred to before. It's what Hiroshi Osada has done and written about in his book, which is not translated to English, it's only in Japanese. But we see that this is the opportunity area for us to learn what do we need to do to affect transformation in businesses and not just incremental improvements. Now, another way of looking at these things in a Western environment is through Six Sigma. And so if we start talking about that three-tiered organization where we had daily management as a compliance organization, business excellence as an aspiration, and then change management is a planning process, we see that basically Hoshin Kanri, Kaizen Kanri, and Nichijou Kanri are the three elements of the circle. Hinshitsu Kanri is actually the check or control process for the strategy monitor. And if we take a look at this Lean Six Sigma process where we talk about change projects, the full spectrum of a Six Sigma project begins with recognize or strategic alignment. Then we define, measure, analyze, improve, and control to get a solution. Then we integrate that solution into the business, standardize it, and now we're into the daily management system. So that's a transformation process to take Six Sigma statistical-based decision-making into the daily management system of the organization. So we establish first strategic intent. We then have projects that will drive the change, and then we integrate into routine work, and then we audit the work and maintain the standards. And that then becomes the way that we can implement policy improvement with the Six Sigma method. And we can see that basically when we're observing a potential portfolio of change, there's two major types of team-based projects that we can do. One are Kaizen events, and the other are Hoshin projects. And the Hoshin project is something where we don't really understand what needs to be done. We have to take a detailed look at it. A Kaizen event is where we can actually understand things relatively simply by the people working in the process. They just have to have maybe some time and resources to take a look at it. So the type of project that we assign and the level of competence required in the team to affect that is actually going to be dependent on how we analyze that situation. So there is a comprehensive model that we can put together in summary. So first we have the SDCA model of Gemba 1, and then we have the PDCA model of Gemba 2. And in Gemba 3, we have the Plan, Do, Study Act model that was proposed by Deming. Now, it's not replacing PDCA. If you look at Deming's book carefully, you see that he proposed this model in the context of executive process management. And what he proposed was that executives need to do the study process. And so what we see when we start linking this, we see there's a checkball process happening between study and the check steps. And that's the strategy review process. And when we take a look at this, we're identifying the gaps. We synchronize the strategies going up the organization. And the strategy monitor process is saying, how does management study what's happening in the Gemba 1 situation? So this is the model of how that whole structure operates for the good. So some takeaway lessons learned. What are the contributions at each of these Gemba levels? Well, Gemba 1, there are cycles of learning and execution. So we see this discovery, Genichi Genbutsu, go and see for yourself. We document, that's the 5R process about developing and assigning rules. And then there's the doing process of this, where we actually learn and we follow this do-check cycle in work. Gemba 2, projects are either run bottom up, those will tend to be Kaizen projects, or top down, those will tend to engage the executives and they will be more resource intensive, more requirements about integration with business strategy, and those will be top down. Critical assumptions and data are analyzed to remove waste and loss, and we apply evidence-based thinking. So that is about statistics and probability, and we use that as a way to see continual improvement and look at gaining a total systems approach. And in Gemba 3, the long-term vision is set and achieved. So we're designing and developing a system of people and their competence and the process to support them with capability as well as capacity, and combining organizational resources to achieve realization of the vision and the long-term transformation of that organization. And so we've come to the end of the presentation now. And what I'd like you to do is to study this, because it's been put together over about 20 years. It's not a quick and dirty summary. It's a long and very detailed summary of how quality methods need to come together in a systems approach to get you ready for how technology can be used in the future. Not every organization is prepared to this. For many organizations, this will be much more than you need. For some organizations, you'll need to have this much faster because you're in a high-tech environment where technology is driving competition. But those choices need to be made by your management team as part of their policy for continual improvement. Thank you.